My name is Adele Monroe, 38 years old, and until this morning I thought I knew what family meant. That was before I found the forged withdrawal slips scattered across the guest room floor. The ink smell hit me first sharp, metallic, unmistakable. My name was signed again and again, perfect loops and curves that weren't mine. The numbers were worse. 20,000, 35,000, gone. My hands trembled as I picked up each page, realizing the suitcase that sat in the corner last night had vanished. The drawers gaped open, clothes missing. Even the picture frame I kept on the dresser was empty, its glass reflecting nothing but morning light. And on the pillow a note: "Sorry. I needed a fresh start. Don't look for me." For a second I couldn't breathe. Betrayal doesn't scream. It seeps in, quiet and steady, until everything inside you feels hollow. I pressed the slips to my chest, trying to believe this was some mistake. Then a small voice came from the doorway, soft but certain. "Mom, don't worry. I handled it." I turned toward my 13-year-old son, standing there in his rumpled t-shirt, his tone calm, almost rehearsed. Before I could ask what he meant, a loud knock rattled the front door, 3 sharp hits that made the walls seem thinner. If you've ever learned the hard way that betrayal can come from your own blood, hit subscribe. Each week, I share family stories where truth, not loyalty, decides who survives. The pounding on the door stopped as suddenly as it had started. For a breath, the silence was heavier than the noise. I straightened my back, wiped my palms on my jeans, and opened the door. 2 men stood there, one in a dark coat, posture firm, eyes alert. He introduced himself as Detective Riley Stone from Spokane Police. The other, quieter, carried a briefcase marked with the emblem of Northwest Bank. His name was Victor Lang, Fraud Investigations. They didn't need to say much. The way they looked at me told me they already knew. I stepped aside to let them in, my stomach tightening with each step they took across the living room. Detective Stone moved first, his gaze landing on the papers still scattered on the rug. He picked one up carefully, reading my forged signature under the morning light. Then he asked if I had noticed anything strange last night, his tone professional, almost gentle. I told him my brother had stayed over for a few days. He'd said he needed time to figure things out. I hadn't realized that meant cleaning out my savings. Victor Lang placed his briefcase on the table and began sorting through a folder. He explained the procedures as if reading from a manual: unauthorized withdrawals, frozen transactions, an internal alert that had triggered the bank's fraud division. He spoke about protocols, signatures, confirmation forms. The words blurred into one long hum, but the weight of them pressed down on my chest. He handed me a pen, asked for my initials beside each statement. My hand moved automatically, my eyes fixed on the black ink bleeding across the paper. The smell reminded me of the morning's discovery, the same metallic sting that had clung to the forged slips. Detective Stone's radio crackled softly while I signed. He stepped away to answer, his voice low and steady. When he returned, he said my brother had been found outside the city, at a convenience store ATM, with a woman named Maya Kerr. Both were in custody, awaiting processing. The name stung. I remembered the call from Shane weeks ago, when he'd mentioned someone new who understood him. I'd thought it was harmless. Now the name sat heavy in my mind like a stone at the bottom of a pond. Lang asked me to confirm one final detail: the total amount missing. 55,000, he said, eyes calm, almost apologetic. He explained that part of it was recoverable, but only if I acted quickly. I signed the last form. My hand shook so badly the signature slanted. He gathered the documents neatly, thanked me, and left a card in case I remembered anything useful. Detective Stone lingered longer. His voice softened when he said they'd call once my brother was processed, that I should rest. The word rest felt absurd. When they finally left, the house fell quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I stayed at the table, staring at the ink still glistening on the forms. My throat burned. Every line of my name written by someone else felt like a cut. The phone rang late that afternoon. I almost didn't answer. Static, then a voice hoarse, desperate. "Shane." He spoke fast, words tripping over each other. He said it wasn't his fault, that the woman had promised everything would be fine. He said someone had set him up, that whoever did it knew every detail. The withdrawals, the phone, the route out of town. His voice cracked when he asked, who else could have known that? I couldn't answer. I looked toward the hallway where my son sat on the floor, quiet, methodical, building a line of chess pieces across the carpet. His face gave nothing away. Shane's breathing rasped through the receiver. I told him he'd forged my name, taken what wasn't his. He didn't argue. He just muttered that he'd pay it back, that I didn't understand, that someone was watching him. Then, softer, he said, "Watch your boy." The line went dead. For a long time, I stood there listening to the dial tone until it faded. The house seemed smaller, the air thinner. I hung up the phone, pressed my palms flat on the counter, and told myself that he was only trying to make me feel guilty. But deep down, something cold began to move. By the next morning, the house felt too quiet, as if even the walls were waiting for an explanation. I moved through the rooms on autopilot, collecting empty cups, straightening a picture frame that suddenly looked meaningless. When I reached the kitchen, a folded sheet of paper lay on the counter. My first instinct was to ignore it, but the handwriting stopped me. Careful, deliberate, slightly slanted Tyler's. The page began with a greeting that chilled me. Dear Uncle Shane. I read the rest slowly, my heart thudding with each line. He wrote about forgiveness, about learning from mistakes, but every sentence carried an undercurrent of warning. You chose a criminal over family, he'd written. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. Toward the end, his tone shifted from reflective to sharp. Prison has rules. You'll learn them. You belong there, because out here you only hurt the people who care about you. And then, the final lines. If you ever try to come back, if you take from us again, I'll make sure you finish what you started. The words blurred. I gripped the counter, unable to decide if I was reading the thoughts of a boy or a threat disguised as morality. My son's handwriting looked small and neat, but the message beneath it was anything but innocent. Before I could collect myself, a car pulled into the driveway. Through the front window, I saw a woman in a navy blazer step out, clipboard in hand. She introduced herself as Erin Price, caseworker from Child Protective Services. Her smile was professional, rehearsed. Just a routine welfare check, Mrs. Monroe. With your brother's recent arrest, we follow up on all minor dependents involved in the household. I nodded and let her in, the folded letter still burning in my pocket. Erin spoke gently as she toured the house. Tyler appeared at the top of the stairs, perfectly composed. His hair was brushed, his shirt tucked in. Good morning, ma'am, he said politely, offering his hand. The exchange looked so natural it might have been rehearsed. He led her to his room, neat to the point of discomfort. The bed was made with hospital corners, the desk organized by subject, a closed laptop sitting dead center. Erin seemed impressed, jotting notes with a faint smile. They talked for several minutes about school, friends, and how he was coping with the situation. Tyler answered with quiet precision, never hesitating. He said he felt sad sometimes, but that his mom made sure he was safe. Erin's expression softened. That's a very healthy perspective, she said. When the visit ended, she told me she'd file a positive report. You're raising an extraordinary young man, she added before leaving. The door closed, and silence reclaimed the house. Tyler looked at me, the corners of his mouth lifting just slightly. That went well, he said, heading for the kitchen as if he'd just passed a test. I stood there, frozen, unable to find words. My thoughts were still tangled around the letter in my pocket. That night, while Tyler was upstairs, the phone rang again. I almost didn't pick up, but the unfamiliar number pushed a strange urgency through me. The voice on the other end was female, sharp, venomous. So you think you're clever, huh? She hissed. You think the police just found him? I know who tipped them. My pulse spiked. Who is this? You know who, she sneered. Maya Kerr. Or maybe you know me by another name. Tell your little genius to stay out of my business, or I'll tell your brother everything. Before I could respond, footsteps creaked on the stairs. Tyler appeared in the doorway, eyes calm. Without hesitation, he took the phone from my hand. His voice was steady, almost amused. If you really knew anything, you wouldn't be calling from a disposable phone. You'd be running. A pause, then a curse, muffled by static. The line went dead. Tyler handed the phone back to me. She's bluffing, Mom, he said, casual, almost kind. That's what people like her do, they scare you first. I tried to respond, but no words came. The house hummed softly around us, the refrigerator clicking, the clock ticking too loud. He smiled faintly. See? Handled. Then he walked away, leaving me with a silence that felt like a question I wasn't ready to answer. By late afternoon, I drove to the county jail with the kind of focus that comes only when there is no room left for anything else. The building rose out of the pavement like a concrete decision, unblinking and practical. Inside, the fluorescent lights made every surface look too clean and every flaw too visible. I handed over my ID, emptied my pockets, and followed a guard down a corridor that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old air. They seated me in a visitation booth and left me with a pane of glass and a receiver that looked touched by 1,000 quiet disasters. When my brother appeared on the other side, he seemed smaller than memory allowed, as if regret had pressed the edges of him inward. I studied him the way you study a photograph that doesn't belong to you, curious, protective of nothing. What passed between us wasn't conversation so much as an exchange of obligations. He tried to arrange his story into sense. A woman who promised solutions, roots that were supposed to be invisible, a plan that should have stayed hidden. Underneath the pieces ran a single line someone had known too much. He wanted me to accept that the world had tilted against him. He wanted me to admit that the tilt began at my door. I gave him very little in return. I thought about ink on paper and loops that matched my name without belonging to me. I thought about a boy who didn't flinch when the house changed shape. I told myself that exhaustion can turn suspicion into a kind of superstition. Still, a phrase rose and settled in my head like dust. Watch him. It didn't belong to any one voice now. It belonged to the room. A hand on a clock somewhere told us we were finished. The guard signaled. The booth emptied. I walked back through the corridor, returned my belongings, and stepped into air that should have felt freer than it did. Driving home, I kept to the slow lane and let other cars pass without argument. The city looked ordinary again, which felt like the smallest betrayal of the day. The house met me with the quiet of a place that had learned to hold its breath. I put groceries on the counter and stood very still until the ringing phone insisted on being part of the evening. The caller introduced himself as Mr. Daniel Harris, the guidance counselor at Tyler's school. His voice carried the certainty of a practiced calm. He referenced a welfare check, recent stressors, and the value of routine support. He proposed a series of counseling sessions, nothing dramatic, just a place to untangle what the mind knots when no one is watching. I agreed before he finished explaining the schedule. The pen I used to jot down times left grooves in the paper. After the call, I moved through small tasks that felt like anchors, putting away milk, stacking bowls, wiping a spotless counter, and calling it work. The kitchen window held a reflection I recognized, a woman who had mastered the art of keeping motion with a still face. Somewhere in the house, footsteps crossed a hallway and disappeared. I told myself not to measure the weight of each step. I paused outside Tyler's room. The door stood open, the bed made with the kind of attention that suggests control more than comfort. On the desk lay a black notebook. I knew better than to open it, but knowing better had not saved me from anything lately. The page that met me was organized into a perfect grid. A chessboard lived there, precise and quietly cruel. Pawns had crossed to the far side and become queens, not just one but many. The opposing king sat pressed into a corner with nothing left that didn't cost him everything. Analysis arrived without invitation. A field of ordinary pieces had been converted into something heavy and unblinking. The miracle of promotion looked less like triumph than like multiplication of pressure. The drawing didn't celebrate victory, it described inevitability. I traced the shape of the trapped king with my gaze and tried to assign a face to it. The answer changed 3 times and refused to settle. In the doorway, a presence gathered without sound. I didn't turn right away. There are moments when explanation is the enemy of understanding, and this felt like one of them. I closed the notebook in a single, careful motion and set it where I had found it. The room, which had been only furniture and light a moment ago, resumed the outline of a life, a desk, a lamp, a set of sharpened pencils waiting for instructions. I walked back to the kitchen and poured water as if thirst were the point. The glass sweated against my hand. Routine asserted itself. Check the lock, set out tomorrow's backpack, confirm the time for the first counseling session. I entered the appointment into my phone like a promise to a future version of us. The night assembled itself along the edges of the house. Rooms settled, pipes whispered, a heater clicked once, and thought better of it. In bed, I kept my eyes open until they stopped obeying me. When sleep finally came, it wasn't mercy, it was paperwork being filed in a distant office. Somewhere in that filing, a note slid into the record. Boundaries to be enforced, appointments to be kept, patterns to be watched. Morning would come with its unoriginal list of tasks. For now, the plan was simpler and heavier. Keep the door closed, keep the pieces where they are, and make sure the king on the page never learns my name. Morning came without sound. The sun filtered through thin curtains, laying quiet stripes across the kitchen floor. I watched the light shift while coffee filled the air, then faded into something less alive. Tyler sat at the table, calm and steady, a shadow of focus behind his eyes. He didn't look like a boy waiting for school, he looked like someone already late for a meeting with himself. The counseling appointment was set for the afternoon. I told myself that professional neutral help was the next right step. Yet, every moment between now and then felt like walking beside a sleeping dog I wasn't sure I'd ever known. My mother, Margaret Monroe, arrived unannounced near midday. She carried the kind of energy that insists on being useful bags of groceries, unsolicited advice, a list of things that might make the house feel normal again. She filled space as if silence were contagious. Her eyes swept the kitchen, then landed on me with that look she'd perfected decades ago. The mix of judgment and affection that can't decide which one deserves to win. She spoke about Shane without naming him directly, about forgiveness as if it were furniture you could dust off and reuse. I nodded because arguing would have required more strength than belief. When she turned her attention to Tyler, her tone softened in a way that pulled me apart. He accepted her kindness with careful politeness, responding only when necessary, each movement deliberate. She seemed charmed by his calm. I saw only the edges of something rehearsed. By early afternoon, the house felt smaller, the air thinner. I left Tyler in his room and waited by the car for the counselor's reminder call that never came. When I went back inside, he was standing at the window, watching the street as though cataloging every passing car. He turned slightly when I entered, his face unreadable, and asked whether Grandma was staying for dinner. The question was practical, but it landed like a test. Margaret decided to stay. She moved easily through the house, cooking as if she'd never stopped living there. The sound of utensils and boiling water was a strange comfort, anchoring me to something ordinary. Tyler set the table, measured and precise. He placed each fork parallel, each glass aligned with quiet intent. During dinner, the balance shifted. Margaret talked about family, how storms pass, how good boys grow strong from hardship. Tyler listened with polite stillness. At one point, he reached for his glass and paused, eyes flicking toward her with a subtle intensity that made me forget to breathe. The conversation drifted to lighter topics, but the air never recovered. Later, as the plates dried on the rack, Margaret suggested that Tyler come stay with her for a few days. A change of environment, she called it. The logic was sound. The offer came from love. Still, the image of her house, the quiet rooms, the trust she gave freely made my stomach tighten. I told her we'd think about it, and she smiled like a woman who'd already decided. That night, Tyler worked at his desk long after he was supposed to be asleep. The glow of his lamp drew lines across the hallway floor. I stood in my doorway, half shadow, half mother, listening to the quiet rhythm of pencil on paper. When he finally closed his notebook, he didn't go straight to bed. He walked to the window and stood there for a long time, motionless. From where I stood, I could see his reflection, his posture, his stillness, the faint lift of his lips that wasn't quite a smile. Sleep was impossible. I sat on the couch with the TV muted, letting the flicker of light replace conversation. Around midnight, my phone buzzed a notification from the jail's automated system. An update. Shane had been transferred to a hospital for observation. The words carried no explanation, only coordinates and time. I didn't move for several minutes. The house remained perfectly still, except for the slow ticking of the clock. When I finally rose, I passed Tyler's room again. The door was closed, but a thin slice of light escaped through the crack near the floor. I waited for it to go dark. It didn't. The next morning, Margaret sat at the kitchen table with her coffee, speaking softly about second chances and new beginnings. Her faith in redemption was solid, old-fashioned, almost beautiful. I wanted to believe in it. Instead, I poured myself more coffee and watched Tyler walk in, rested, polite, ready for another ordinary day. Outside, a mail truck pulled away from the curb, leaving behind a small envelope on the front step. Margaret fetched it on her way out. She handed it to me with a faint smile before hugging Tyler goodbye. He waved from the doorway, calm and perfect. The envelope was plain, the address handwritten. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a note from the correctional facility stating that Shane Monroe was stable but in restricted care following an incident. The term sat heavy in my throat. When I looked up, Tyler was already watching me from across the kitchen. His gaze was direct, neutral, almost gentle. Behind him, the morning light drew its familiar pattern on the floor, and for a moment, it felt like the whole house was waiting to see what I'd do next. The night began without warning. It simply arrived, folding over the house like a curtain drawn too quickly. The air carried a stillness that felt deliberate, a kind of quiet that listens more than it rests. I sat in bed reading the same page over and over, the words refusing to arrange themselves into meaning. Somewhere below, the refrigerator hummed, and the sound felt almost human. At 11:47, the phone lit up on the nightstand. A number I didn't recognize. I let it ring once before picking it up. The voice on the other end was female, sharp, and breathless, reciting my name as if confirming it against a list. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't have to. The static between her sentences was enough to pull her from memory. Maya Raines, the woman who had convinced Shane to vanish with everything we owned. Her words came in short, practiced bursts, all accusation and no proof. Someone had betrayed her, she said. Someone had set them up, fed the police their route, their plans, their accounts. She said she knew it wasn't me. Then she paused, long enough for certainty to rot into something colder, and asked if my son was home. For a heartbeat, everything inside me went silent. She laughed once, low and bitter, then the line went dead. The room felt smaller after that. The shadows seemed to move on their own, stretching across the floor like something testing boundaries. I set the phone down and stared at it until my reflection blurred in the black screen. The clock ticked once and stopped sounding like time. From the hallway came a faint creak, a door opening. Footsteps, light, measured, unhurried, passed outside my room and drifted toward the staircase. I rose without thought, following at a distance that felt safer than courage. Tyler stood at the base of the stairs, motionless in the dim light. His figure was small but too composed, his back straight, his hands relaxed at his sides. The glow from the streetlight caught the edge of his face, outlining a calm that didn't belong to a 13-year-old. He wasn't sneaking out, he was waiting. The silence between us was a kind of conversation. I wanted to ask what he'd heard, what he knew, what he had done, but language felt useless, too heavy, too late. He turned slightly, enough for me to see his expression. It wasn't defiance or guilt, it was assessment, a quiet inventory of whether I was still part of his plan. Up close, I could see a smudge of ink on his wrist, the same shade as the graphite that filled his notebook pages. I wanted to reach for it, to wipe it away like an ordinary mother fixing a small, harmless mess. Instead, I stood there, watching the boy who had stopped needing me long before I noticed. He climbed the stairs again, slow and deliberate, not looking back. When his door clicked shut, the sound echoed through the house as if the walls themselves were marking a decision. I stayed downstairs for hours, unable to sit, unwilling to move. The phone remained on the counter where I'd left it, the screen still blank but carrying the weight of that disconnected voice. The thought formed quietly, without permission. If Maya knew, then Shane had told her. If Shane hadn't, then someone else had. The only person who could have known every detail was under my roof. Around 2, I checked on Tyler. His room was dark except for the sliver of moonlight cutting across the desk. The notebook was open again, turned to a fresh page. More diagrams, more names turned into symbols. In the corner, a single line of text read like an instruction. Every move has consequence. I closed the notebook gently, then locked it in the drawer beneath his desk. The act felt useless even as I did it. When I returned to my room, the phone buzzed once more. This time it was an automated message from the hospital where Shane had been transferred. The words were stripped of emotion, but they did their work. Condition critical, observation ongoing. I stared at the screen until the letters dissolved into static light. Outside, a wind picked up, rattling the loose siding on the garage. The noise carried through the house, sharp and uneven, like someone trying to get in. I checked the locks twice, then a third time, each click a fragile promise that walls could still mean safety. Before dawn, I found myself in the living room, sitting with the lights off, watching the first gray hint of morning slip under the blinds. Tyler came down quietly, dressed for school, his backpack already on. He didn't glance at me. He moved with the efficiency of someone who understood time better than emotion. When he left, the door shut without a sound. The house once again began its slow exhale. In the center of the table lay the chess notebook key I hadn't remembered placing there. It gleamed faintly in the early light, a small, deliberate reminder that every lock in this house had already been opened once. The morning after the storm carried a quiet that felt earned. The air smelled of rain and dust, a clean sort of aftermath. I moved through the kitchen like someone returning to a museum of her own life, each object still in its place, each surface scrubbed of what it had witnessed. A message waited on my phone. It came from a number that belonged to no one anymore. The hospital update was brief. Shane Monroe, deceased, natural causes pending review. The language of bureaucracy had found a way to make even death sound procedural. I sat at the table for a long time, not grieving, not relieved, simply aware that a door had closed, and another had stayed open behind it. When Tyler returned from school that afternoon, his shirt was neatly tucked in, his expression calm. He placed his backpack on the floor, washed his hands, and began making dinner as though the rhythm of our lives had never cracked. His composure was almost reverent, like a child performing a sacred duty. I watched him slice vegetables with the precision of a clockmaker. The sound of the knife against the board filled the space where words might have lived. I thought about how easily order can disguise control, how silence can masquerade as peace. The police called later that evening to confirm the timeline of Shane's final hours. The officer's tone was careful, almost apologetic. There were signs, he said, that the situation in the hospital had been influenced, security footage missing, phone records inconsistent, one visitor unaccounted for. They were still reviewing it, but their phrasing was clear: interference. After the call, I sat in the dim kitchen until the light disappeared. In the dark reflection of the window, my own face looked older than I remembered. But there was also something else, an understanding that certain patterns, once set in motion, don't stop at the edge of reason. 2 days later, Maya Raines was found in another county, detained during a traffic stop. Fraud, obstruction, multiple counts of conspiracy. The news mentioned my brother's name only once, as a related case. The woman who had pulled him into ruin was now facing her own sentence. Justice, I thought, had a strange way of mimicking revenge. At home, Tyler kept to his routines: school, homework, chess practice with himself. He never asked about Shane, and I never offered answers. The silence between us was steady, durable, efficient. One evening, I went to the attic to look for the old family photo albums. Dust coated everything like fine regret. Inside one box was the chess notebook I thought I had locked away. Its pages were open to a new diagram. This one was different. The board was cleared of pawns, only the king remained, toppled on its side. Beneath it, written in Tyler's narrow handwriting, was a single word: checkmate. The page trembled in my hands. It wasn't anger or fear anymore, it was comprehension. Whatever game had begun with my brother had found its conclusion here, and like all conclusions, it carried a price. I closed the book and slid it back into the box. Some truths, I decided, were safer buried among the things we outgrow. That night, Tyler sat on the porch reading, the glow from the lamp drawing a soft outline around him. His face was peaceful, his body small against the vast dark. Anyone passing by would see only a boy doing his homework. From where I stood, I saw the quiet gravity of someone who had learned too early how to end a war by refusing to lose. Before going inside, I whispered a promise into the wind, not to him, not to Shane, but to myself. The cycle ends here. Whatever blood carries, choice can refuse. Weeks later, life rearranged itself into its new order. The bank returned most of the stolen funds. The investigation closed with reports filed, names sealed, and outcomes printed in calm black ink. To the world, it was over. To me, it was documented. Sometimes, I still wake before dawn, listening to the house breathe. Tyler's door stays closed, his footsteps measured. He is polite, brilliant, distant, the kind of boy teachers write glowing reports about. In daylight, he looks harmless. But in quiet moments, I catch glimpses of calculation in his stillness, the inheritance of someone who learned that protection can look like punishment. There are days when I wonder whether I raised a survivor or created one, perhaps both. As for me, I keep moving. I tend the garden, attend work, pay bills. I live a life with neat edges because chaos, once unleashed, never forgets your address. The world outside spins forward, neighbors wave, seasons trade places, and I remain here, tending the silence, guarding the line between what I know and what I'll never admit out loud. And if this story finds you, wherever you are, I hope you understand what I learned too late. Sometimes justice is not about punishment, it's about boundaries. Sometimes family doesn't need reconciliation, it needs distance. If you've stayed with me through every part of this story, thank you. I'd like to hear what you think about loyalty, forgiveness, or the quiet cost of protecting those we love. Share your thoughts below. Maybe your story carries its own lesson too.